Welcome to the webinar. My name is Michele Fourie and I manage the FICA Supervision Unit in the Conduct of Business Division in the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. This webinar today is about registration with the Financial Intelligence Centre in terms of Section 43B of the Financial Intelligence Centre Act, number 38 of 2001. Which we also refer to as the FIC Act. The purpose of the webinar is to provide practical information to promote compliance with the registration requirements in terms of the FIC Act. We have also issued a newsletter that supports this webinar and provides high-level information about the registration obligations we will go to in detail today during the webinar. As an introduction, let me tell you who the Financial Sector Conduct Authority is. We are also referred to as just the authority and was established as a market conduct regulator in terms of Section 56 of the Financial Sector Regulation Act. Included in our objectives, it is certain functions to enhance and support the efficiency and integrity of financial markets, to protect financial customers and assist in maintaining financial stability. This is, however, not our only responsibility. We as the authority is also designated as a supervisory body in terms of Item 1 of Schedule 2 to the FIC Act. This means we are responsible for the supervision of accountable institutions listed under Items 4, 5 and 12 of Schedule 1 to the FIC Act. Supervision of authorized users listed under Item 4 was delegated to exchanges in terms of Section 45(1)BB of the FIC Act. It is important to know that there is a memorandum of understanding between the authority and the Financial Intelligence Centre. Speaking of which, the Financial Intelligence Centre has joined us today to participate in this very important webinar. I will hand over to Philip Langenhoven, who will do the necessary introductions and provide a brief overview of who the Financial Intelligence Centre is. Over to you, Philip, and welcome.
Thank you, Michele, and good day and welcome to everybody from my side. So the Financial Intelligence Centre, before I get to that, my name is Philip Langenhoven. I am a specialist in the Compliance and Prevention Department. I will also be joined by Khanyisa and Ngozwana. She's the manager in the prevention in the FIC responsible for data systems. So the Financial Intelligence Centre has as its legislative mandate is to assist to identify the proceeds of unlawful activities, combat money laundering and terrorist financing, and also to assist with the implementation of financial sanctions as determined by the United Nations Security Council. Now, we receive information from accountable institutions such as yourself. That information is then analyzed and then that is shared with law enforcement agencies, supervisory bodies, intelligence services, SARS and other international agencies. We have memoranda of understanding with all these agencies, so the information is shared in terms of those memoranda of understanding as well as in terms of the FIC Act. In terms of the functions of the FIC, as set out in Section 4 of the FIC Act, one of those functions is to supervise and enforce compliance with the FIC Act. Now, with that, we are then assisted in that by our supervisory bodies, such as the FSCA, as Michele mentioned also in her introduction. Today, the specific focus of today's session will be on the registration obligations that is included in the FIC Act and how this relates to the GoAML system. And my colleague Khanyisa will a bit later go through a few slides with you to explain that process. Thank you. Over back to you, Michele.
Thank you, Philip. So let's get started. The registration requirement is embedded in Section 43 of the FIC Act. That states that every accountable institution referred to in Schedule 1 and every reporting institution referred to in Schedule 3 must, within the prescribed period and the prescribed manner, register with the Centre. The registration of an accountable institution and a reporting institution contemplated in subsection 1 must be accompanied by such particulars as the Centre may require, and the Centre must keep and maintain a register of every accountable and reporting institution so registered. A registered accountable and reporting institution must also notify the Centre in writing of any changes to the particulars furnished in terms of this section within 90 days after such change. So based on this registration requirement in the FIC Act, let's explore and take a broad overview of who, why, when and how registration takes place. Let's deal with who must register with a FIC. In terms of the regulatory requirement, this applies to all accountable and reporting institutions. For purposes of our discussion today, we will focus specifically on those accountable institutions that are listed under items 5 and 12 of Schedule 1. In terms of item 5, this applies to a manager registered in terms of the Collective Investment Schemes Control Act, except for those managers who only conduct business in Part 6 of the Collective Investment Schemes Control Act. And under item 12, it is a person who carries on the business of a financial services provider in terms of the FAIS Act. Important to note that this excludes FSPs who are only registered and authorized to render financial services in respect of short-term insurance and/or health service benefits. They are not accountable institutions. The rest of the FSPs must so register under item 12 with the FIC. In addition, we also get a lot of questions about whether a juristic representative is regarded as an accountable institution, and the short answer is no. However, if a juristic representative of an FSP has as its core business certain functions that are in fact listed in terms of another item in another schedule to the FIC Act, they should so register accordingly. Important to know and to make sure there is no confusion, under item 12, we deal and regard a person who carries on the business of an FSP as an accountable institution. If you are an FSP, but you only sell long-term insurance products, make sure that you register under the correct item, that being item 12 and not 8. Item 8 is designated for those accountable institutions who are in fact life insurance companies and insurers and not just FSPs. Why should you register as an accountable institution with a FIC? Well, as indicated in the regulatory requirement, the FIC is required to maintain a register of all accountable institutions, and this is a legal obligation. However, the registration with the FIC is the only way that you as an accountable institution would be able to comply with your reporting obligations set out in terms of sections 28, 28A and 29 of the FIC Act. Through registration by accountable institutions, the FIC also requests information from accountable institutions in terms of sections 27 and 32 of the FIC Act. You are required to register with a FIC as soon as possible, but no later than 90 days after the day that your business was opened, or in layman's terms, when you were approved as an FSP. Registration with a FIC is an electronic process. There is a prescribed format and the system used is called GoAML. Registration with the FIC does not constitute a licensing process and you will not be issued with a certificate. There is no cost attached to the registration So there's really no reason not to comply. From a practical perspective, it's important to understand how to register with a FIC. I will now hand over to Khanyisa, who's also joining us from the FIC and introduced by Philip, to explain the details of how to register with the FIC. Welcome, Khanyisa. Over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this session. So as Michelle has already explained, I will be taking you through the registration process and how do you actually do it on the FIC system. So to register, you have to go to the FIC website. So that is on fic.gov.za. There is an option there that says click here to register or report. That's the option that you select, and that is where you will register. I will show you more details about this later. So when it comes to registering, the first person to register must be the compliance officer of that entity. So that first person, the compliance officer, you can either then appoint a compliance officer, or you as the FSP, you can actually then be your own compliance officer if you do have that knowledge. So for every entity, there's only one person who must register as the compliance officer, and that is the person that the FIC will contact if they need anything from that entity. You are also allowed to have additional users. So those we call money laundering reporting officers, or MLROs. These people will then help you in your compliance duties, so you can have other people who will help you with the reporting process. So you can have as many users as you want. So in terms of this session today, I will take you through two processes to register. The first one is a new entity registration. This is basically then the process that one needs to follow the first time that they register with the FIC. So that is then where you would have to provide the entity details. So Michelle mentioned that you have to register within 90 days of starting your business. So that would be then where you would then, that is the process you would need to follow. The second process is then to add additional users. So I mentioned that you can have as many users as you want for your organization. So that is the process that you would then have to follow. But I will take you through both processes in detail. Okay. Before you even attempt to register with the FIC, you need to have certain documents that you will upload as part of your registration. Firstly, you need a copy of your ID. So that ID, it must be clear and it must be valid. The document does not need to be certified. If you are not a South African, then you need a copy of your passport. So that also must be a clear copy and it must be a valid. So if you are uploading a passport, that passport must not have expired. Secondly, you need the authorization letter. The authorization letter basically tells the FIC that you are authorized to act on behalf of that entity. So that letter must be on your company letterhead, and it must contain the details of the user who is registering. So it must tell us their full details, like the full names and their ID or passport number. It must also tell us what role they act in the organization and what role must then the FIC give them on the system. So on the screen, we are showing you the examples of then the documents that you do need. We have a copy of a passport there and a passport. We also have a copy of an authorization letter. So we do understand that you as the FSPs, sometimes you are not employing other people, but you are doing the compliance function yourself. In that case, you can write the authorization letter on your own behalf. So just stating your name and then telling us the role that you do play in your organization and what role the FIC can give you. If you have employees in the business, then the main person must then sign the letter on their behalf. I will now take you through the process of registering as an entity. So as I mentioned, this process of registering as an entity is when it's the first time then that entity registers with the FIC. So if you have registered before, do not follow this process, otherwise it will cause duplicates. So if then you are within that 90 days of starting your business and then you are trying to register, and please just do note that even if you didn't register within the 90 days, but if you fall then under the schedule items that you mentioned, you still need to register because it is part of your obligations. So to register as an entity, the compliance officer, so remember the compliance officer must then do this process because this is the first person who has to register with the organization. So that compliance officer must access the FIC registration system or GoML on the FIC website. So you go to fic.gov.za, you go to click here to register or report, and then select the option that says register as an organization. Once you select that, there will be fields that you need to complete. So complete all fields. So the fields that we'll have to complete will contain the entity details as well as then the user details, who is then for the user who's registering it, who is then the compliance officer. So once you've completed the fields, you have to attach then the documents that I mentioned, which is then your ID or passport and also an authorization letter. Once then that compliance officer has completed that, then they submit that registration to the FIC. So once then the registration gets to the FIC, there is a team of people who actually go through all the registrations and make sure that everything is completed correctly and all the documents, relevant documents are attached. And then they will then approve that registration if the information is correct. If there are any outstanding documents or there is information that is not correctly completed, that registration will be rejected, but that compliance officer will receive an email from the FIC system telling them why that registration was rejected. When they receive that email, then they'll have to re-register again. So you cannot change a registration that was not completed. If everything was fine, all the documents are submitted and all the fields completed successfully, then that compliance officer will receive a confirmation email from the FIC to saying that the registration was successfully completed. And after that, then that compliance officer will be able to log into the system. And once then they receive that confirmation email, that email also contains an org ID, which is basically your registration number with the FIC. So that is then the number that you share with your subsequent users, which they will use to register. Okay, so now I'm just going to show you how do you actually do this on the FIC system now. So as I've mentioned, to access the registration system, you have to go to the FIC website, so www.fic.gov.za, and then you select the option that is highlighted on the screen where it says click here to register or report. So when you're registering as a new entity, you must select register as an organization. So once you select that option, a form will come up on the screen that will then require you to complete the entity details as well as the compliance officer details. So the first thing there, when you are registering in terms of the organization business type, please do ensure that you select the correct business type. So Michele did mention the schedule items that are relevant to your industry. Please do not then select item 8 if you are not an insurance company. So you will have to complete the entity details. So you have to complete details like then the entity name and your CIPC number if you are registered with CIP, as well as CIPC, as well as then the contact person and the email. So this person, it's very important that this information is accurate because this is the main person that we contact when we need to contact your entity. Where there's a license number, you can then enter then the license number that you have then with FSCA. So in addition to the entity details, you also have to enter the details of the compliance officer, the person who's registering. So you have to complete details like then the first name and surname and the ID number. So make sure you complete all the fields and make sure that they are all accurate. So once you've completed all the required fields, you have to attach then a copy of your ID or a passport. If you're a foreigner, you also need to attach an authorization letter. So we're just showing you how do you actually then attach those documents. So you can attach them from your computer where you have saved then those documents. So as you see there, that shows you the documents that are actually attached. So there's an ID that's attached there and then the authorization letter. And as I've mentioned with the ID or passport, make sure that it's clear and it can actually be opened. So once you have uploaded those documents, you have to capture a captcha code that you will find at the bottom of the screen. Once you have done that, you can then submit the request to the FIC. So once you submit the request, a reference number will come up on the screen. Please do note that this is not your registration number with the FIC. It is rather just a reference number for your registration. Your registration number with the FIC you will get as part of the confirmation. So once you've then submitted your registration, it will go to the FIC where then the details that you entered will be checked. And there will then be, so if all the information is correct, you will get a confirmation via email to say that you have successfully registered with the FIC. If, however, there is information that is missing or not entered correctly, or you did not attach then your authorization letter and your ID, your registration will be rejected, but you will get an email informing you of the rejection. So if you get an email with the rejection, you will have to then restart the process and register again. And please do note that the documents that are required by the FIC, which are then your ID or passport and the authorization letter, they have to be uploaded as part of your registration. You cannot email them to the FIC afterwards. So if you have successfully registered with the FIC, you will get a confirmation email with your entity details. So these will be the details that you entered when you were registering. And as part of then this confirmation, there's also then the organization ID, which is then your registration number with the FIC. Please keep this confirmation in a safe place, because then that is the proof that you can provide to whoever who wants a proof from you that you are registered with the FIC. So whether then it is FSCA or it is your auditors. And please do note that when it comes to registering with the FIC, you only need to register once. So you don't register every year, you only register once. So keep this in a safe place, because we cannot reissue it for you, because it is a system generated confirmation. So I've just taken you through the process of registering as an entity. That is then when you are registering your entity with the FIC. Now I am going to take you through the process of then registering additional users. So you can only do this process once you have once the compliance officer has registered as an entity and received then that org ID from the FIC. Then you can add your additional users. And as I mentioned before, you can have as many additional users as you want. So in terms of then this process, that then those additional users then must access the FIC system on the FIC website, and then now select the option that says register as a person. So when they're registering, they have to specify the org ID that the compliance officer received as part of the registration, because that org ID will then link those users to that particular organization. They will then have to enter their personal details and then also attach then as part of the registration the copy of the ID or passport, and then the authorization letter. Once they are done, that information is submitted to the FIC for approval. And then if everything is fine and all the relevant documents are contained, then a confirmation email will be received from the FIC to say everything is fine. If there's anything wrong with the details that are entered or the documents are missing, then a rejection email will be received, and then it will detail what was done incorrectly. So if it is rejected, then that user needs to start the registration process again and address then the issues that were highlighted by the FIC. Please also note that this process also applies to entities that were registered with the FIC before April 2016. So if you were registered with the FIC before April 2016, your entity details would have been migrated to the new system called GoML. However, the user details would not have been then migrated. The FIC then in 2016 sent out emails to the people who were previously registered with them to tell them what the org ID is and the fact that they must register as a person. So if you were registered before 2016 and you need to register but you don't know your old org ID, you can contact the FIC through the call center or through then our query process, which is available on our FIC website, to ask then for the org ID. But do not do not register as an entity, because that will create duplicates. So I've taken you through that process. I will show you now how it is actually done on the system. So now we're still adding users. So when we're registering now on the system, you select the register as a person option on the screen there on the menu. So when you are registering, please do not select that individual user option. If you do, your registration will be rejected. And I know this causes confusion, because then with the FSPs, you think maybe because then you're a sole proprietor, you're alone, then you select individual user. Do not select this option. But what you actually need to provide is the org ID. So as I mentioned, the org ID, then the compliance officer would have received it from the first registration, and then all the subsequent users must use that org ID, because then by specifying that org ID, you are saying those users must be linked to that particular entity. Once then that is done, then the person who's registering must then enter their full details. So it is then details like the name and surname and ID number. So do ensure that you complete all the fields. So once then, so that is a full screen showing you all the details that are required. So it's the person's details and details like then phone numbers and addresses. Once then that is done, then that person registering must upload then their ID document or passport and then attach the authorization letter. So we're just showing you how to attach those documents, and as you see there, you can actually see before you submit that those documents are attached, and then you just need to enter the captcha code at the end there. You'll see it's at the bottom of the screen, and then you submit then that request to the FIC. So once you submit the request to the FIC, you will get that reference number. So as I mentioned before, even with the entity, this is just a reference number. It's not your registration number with the FIC. It is just in case you need to follow up anything with the FIC in terms of your registration, in terms of that actual registration, then you can use that number to request more information or if you have queries about your registration. So once then the user has completed the process and has then submitted that registration to the FIC will go through the documents and through that actual registration and make sure that everything is fine. If it is fine, the user will receive a confirmation email which will then tell them that they have successfully registered with the FIC. After that, then they are able to access the system. However, if then there's something wrong with the information submitted, or there is something, or the documents have not been attached, that registration will be rejected. And in the email that the user will receive, there will be then reasons why that registration was rejected. And if then that's the case, that user must then register again. Okay, so I was just taking you through now the process of registering. So registering from scratch. But once you have registered, then you are able to log into the FIC system and then report or do any other thing that you need to do on the FIC system. Now, when it comes to your registration information, there are directives that the FIC has issued to the market. So the first one then is Directive 1, which then instructs all reporting entities to maintain their details on the FIC's electronic platform. So what that means is that firstly, you have to be registered with the FIC. And the only way to register, as I've taken you through that process, is through GoML, no other way to register. Secondly, if any of the entity's details change, that entity has an obligation to ensure that their details are kept up to date on the system. So for an example, if then your address changes or the email address changes or any of the details of the entity changes, the compliance officer must log into GoML and then update then those details under the my org details menu. The third point then, when it comes to this directive, is that if your entity ceases to operate as a business, you have to notify the FIC in writing of that, so that then that entity can be deactivated on the FIC's registration platform. The second directive is Directive 2, which instructs users not to share login credentials. So what this means is that you cannot have one user in your organization using, reporting to the FIC, and then everyone else uses the same login credentials. So every user that interacts with the FIC system must then have their own login credentials. So as I mentioned before, you can register as many users as you want for your organization. The users also have an obligation to ensure that they maintain their details on the system, which then means that if anything changes, like the phone numbers or addresses, they need to update then those details on the system. The third point is that if then any users then no longer operate or no longer work for your organization, you need to notify the FIC in writing so that then they can be deactivated from the system. So when you update your details, as I mentioned, you can update the details on GoML, and that's where you should update them. So once you update them, so for an example, maybe you change the address or phone number, you update them on the system, and then that, once you're done and you submit your request, it comes to the FIC, and then you will get, and then the FIC will check the details, and if everything is fine, you will get then a confirmation of then that update. Okay, so this slide basically then summarizes everything that I mentioned. So it tells you how do you actually register as an organization or as a person, and then it just reminds you how to update entity information. It also then just advises you on how to create a password, because sometimes people then do struggle with how to do that. But however, if you are struggling to register, we do have a registration guide which is available on the FIC website. We also have a registration video which is also available on the FIC website or on the FIC's YouTube channel. And you can always then contact the FIC on our call center, or you can contact us through our query process, which is available on the FIC website as well, under the Contact Us menu.
Sure, thank you, Khanyisa. That was very insightful. You mentioned that if a person is perhaps left an accountable institution, they need to be deregistered. We've received some queries about that in the past. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about the deregistration process?
Okay, so when it comes to then deregistration, so firstly, you can deregister users. So you would deregister users if then users no longer work for your organization. So if any of your users resign, you must then let the FIC know in writing so that we can deactivate then those users. Please do not continue using then their details after they've left. You must then register the new users and then notify the FIC of the users who have left the organization so that we can deactivate them. Secondly, you can deactivate entities. So if that business closes down and it's no longer operating, you have to notify the FIC in writing so that we can then remove that registration from the FIC system. So in order to deregister a user or an accountable institution, you have to go to the FIC website and then go to the Contact the FIC menu, and then you must log a compliance query. So in the compliance query, give us the details about, if it's a user, give us the details about that user, if you have the username, you can give us that as well as then their names or full names, and then the reason why you want us to deactivate them. So they might have left the organization, or they might have moved to a different area of your organization. To deactivate a company, you also then, or an entity, you also follow the same steps where you go to the FIC website and then you provide us the details and the org ID of that entity. And then you must tell us why you actually need it to be deactivated. So it might be then that, yeah, it has stopped operating. So that is why then you are deactivating. But it's important to provide us then the full details. Once we do receive then those details, we will then deactivate those users or entities on the FIC system.
Thank you, Khanyisa. I think it's now clear what the deregistration program is all about. In addition to all this practical steps provided, I'm sure you being an expert on the Go AML system and working with it every day, you do find some common mistakes made by users who try to register or perhaps update their details. Could you share with us some of the things that you come across?
Okay, so the first thing we find is that people do not attach the required documents when they are registering. So for an example, they will not attach a copy of an ID or a passport. Now, if that document is missing, your registration will be rejected. And as I mentioned before, it's important to attach those as part of the registration. You cannot send those on email afterwards to the FIC. They have to be part of your registration. We also find that in some instances, the ID or passport are attached, but then the copy is not clear. So we cannot see the person's face, we cannot see the details. In that case as well, that registration will be deactivated. We also find that in some instances, the authorization letter is not attached. So in those instances as well, we will then reject then that registration. And we also find that when a person is registering, they don't complete all the required fields. So for an example, one of the fields is the ID number, but sometimes people feel that because they have attached an ID copy, they don't actually have to complete the details. But you still need to complete all the details when it comes to the users and also when it comes to the entity details. We also find that sometimes the business type or schedule item that is selected is not correct. So for an example, we mentioned the fact that when you register as an FSP, you should not be registering as item 8. You should rather be registering as item 12. So please do ensure that you select the correct schedule item or business type. The other issue we find is that when it comes to registering as part of the FIC Act, you have to register per schedule item that you operate under. So if you are an item 5 and an item 12, those would be two different registrations. You cannot submit one registration when you have different schedule items that you operate as. The other issue we find is that people select the individual user option that I showed you when I was talking about the registration as a person. Please do not select that option, even if you are a sole proprietor. It is not, it is not for those purposes. And if you do select it, your registration will be rejected. So one other issue that we do have, so as I mentioned before, that in April 2016, the FIC implemented a new registration system called GoML. Now, there were entities which were registered with the FIC before 2016. Those entities, their entity details were migrated but then the users were not migrated. Now, those people, when they are registering, they must not register as an organization because that creates duplicates. They must register as a person, but then using the org ID that is linked to the old registration. So those org IDs were emailed by the FIC to the relevant entities. However, if then that entity, you know, you were registered before 2016, but you do not have that org ID, please do contact the FIC through the call center or through the FIC website on contact the FIC and compliance queries. We will provide that org ID for you. You might also have noticed that we might have sent you demand letters to register with the FIC. Please do not ignore those, but action them. And if you're not sure how to action them, please contact our contact center or then log a query on our website, and then we will assist you and tell you what steps do you actually need to take.
Thank you, Khanyisa. This was very insightful, and certainly we can all learn from each other's mistakes so that we don't repeat them. Well, now that we know all about who and why, when, where, and how to register with the FIC, it is important to emphasize again that registration is a regulatory requirement that must be complied with. Failure to comply with the registration requirements in the Act is a sanctionable offence, and this includes compliance with the directives as explained in detail by Khanyisa, as it relates to prohibition on sharing of login details and updating personal information. If you have not yet registered or failed to update your registration details, please visit the website of the FIC today. Their contact details were provided during the presentation and are also provided on the screen now. You can also contact the FSCA on the details provided on the screen for you. We would like to thank you for your time and attention, and we really hope that you found this as very informative and helpful to assist you with your registration queries and issues. We also want to extend a very warm appreciation to our colleagues from the FIC who joined us and whose practical experience provided so much value to this discussion today. Please look out for our future newsletters and webinars that we will bring to you very soon, and stay safe. Thank you.